Genesis chapter 6 verses 1 through 4 read, And it came to pass, when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. There were Nephilim in the earth in those days. And also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. The word Nephilim is often translated as giants, a legitimate and appropriate interpretation, but one which may only be partially accurate. A better definition might be those who came down, those who descended, or those who were cast down. The Annunaki of ancient Sumerian texts is similarly described as those who from heaven to earth came. Sitchin, Gardner, and Bramley have all identified the Nephilim as the Annunaki, more specifically, essentially the rank and file. Virtually all open-minded historical and theological scholars agree that the Old Testament's book of Genesis was extracted from the older Sumerian records, if only because of the similarity of their comparative religions. The Enuma Elish, the Sumerian epic of creation, and Genesis have a variety of common elements. Stories of a great flood and the deluge, among others, are also common to both Sumerian and biblical accounts. An inevitable conclusion is that the Anunnaki were as real as Noah, Moses, or Abraham. Lawrence Gardner has written, Every item of written and pictorial attestation confirms that the ancient Sumerians were absolutely sincere about the existence of the Anunnaki, and those such as Enki, Enlil, Kin-Kursag, and Inanna fulfilled earthly functions with designated community duties. They were patrons and founders, they were teachers and justices, they were technologists and kingmakers. They were jointly and severally venerated as archons and masters, but they were certainly not idols of religious worship, as the ritualistic gods of subsequent cultures became. In fact, the word which was eventually translated to become worship was avod, which meant quite literally, just work for. The Anunnaki presence may baffle historians, their language may confuse linguists, and their advanced techniques may bewilder scientists, but to dismiss them is foolish. The Sumerians have themselves told us precisely who they were, and neither history nor science can prove otherwise. The Sumerian records recorded in great detail the stories of the Anunnaki, and among these those of Enki, Enlil, Ninki, Inanna, Utu, Ningshitsa, Marduk, and many others. Chief among these stories was the continuing conflict between Enki and Enlil, the sons of the supreme god of the time, Anu. Much of ancient human history and the biblical Genesis can be explained as the militant differences between these two half-brothers, and how they affected the life of all sentient beings on Earth. But the Anunnaki were more than just a pair of squabbling half-brothers. They were the council of gods and goddesses, who periodically met to consider their future actions with respect to each other, and probably as a smaller, nondescript item on their agenda, the fate of mankind. The Anunnaki, depending on the context, were the Nephilim, the gods that Abraham's father, Terah, according to the book of Joshua, was reputed to have served, the fallen angels, the lesser individuals of the race from which Anu, Enki, Enlil, Inanna, and the other notables had sprung, and they were the judges over the question of life and death. They were in fact the Bene Elohim, which translates as the sons of the gods, or equally likely, the sons of the goddesses. From the 82nd Psalm. Jehovah takes his stand at the council of El to deliver judgment among the Elohim. You too are gods, son of El Elyon, all of you. The Anunnaki have also been equated with the Watchers mentioned in the books of Daniel and Jubilees. According to Zecharia Sitchin and his interpretation of the ancient Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial angels, who were an extremely long-lived race, potentially living as long as 500,000 years. Lawrence Gardner reduces this to more on the order of 50,000 years, and notes specifically that the Anunnaki were not immortal. He points out that no records are currently extant which relate to their natural deaths, but the violent deaths of Apsu, Tiamat, Mumu, in Dumuzi are provided in some detail. Sitchin and Gardner also disagree on the date of the Great Deluge and Flood. Sitchin assumes a time frame of 11,000 BC, while Gardner assumes one more of 4,000. Sitchin's book, The 12th Planet, published in 1976, was the first modern volume to begin to describe the Anunnaki, their arrival on Earth supposedly some 485,000 years ago, and from where they had come, a planet they call Nibiru. Sitchin believes Nibiru to be in an orbit about our Sun, but in a strongly elliptical orbit which requires 3,600 Earth years to complete. Nibiru's perihelion is thought to be within the main asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, at a distance from the Sun of approximately 2 3/4 AUs. Nibiru is not known to modern astronomy, primarily due to the extreme elliptical nature of its orbit, and the fact that its aphelion is more than 8 times the distance from the Sun to the planet Pluto. Furthermore, Nibiru may now be far out in deep space and unlikely to be detected. While Sitchin and Gardner may disagree on the extent of the long lives of the Anunnaki, it is clear that these gods and goddesses, barring accidents or Anunnaki-side, lived a very long time. It has also been theorized that because of their long lives, they did not quite move in the fast lane, at least in the way that the humans do. This could be fundamentally important in that quite possibly the human lifespan, while enormously brief as compared to the Anunnaki gods and goddesses, might nevertheless be compensated by the humans possessing the ability to achieve of great detail in a relatively short time. The creativity of a shortened and thus highly motivated lifespan is likely to be enormously greater than that of a god or semi-god resting on their laurels. This may also relate to the idea of why the gods and goddesses of the Anunnaki even bother with mankind. Humans may, on the other hand, act as workers to accomplish the Anunnaki's agenda, but an accelerated creativity may well be worth the trouble for the Anunnaki to manage a crew as motley as the human race. But the connection between humans and the Anunnaki is much more profound than that of masters and slaves. All of the evidence strongly advocates the concept that Adam and Eve and their ancestors, cousins and what have you, were created by the genetic engineering and mixing the DNA of Anunnaki with that of Homo erectus, the reigning progenitor of man at the time. Fundamentally, this was because the Anunnaki needed someone to work the mines in search of gold and other precious metals. The most fundamental question with respect to the Anunnaki is whether or not they're still on Earth today. Sitchin has pointed out that he said they never left, and there is no evidence that they did. There was, however, an apparently fundamental Anunnaki policy shift about 600 BC, wherein the overt day-to-day interference in human affairs by them disappeared. There is also the scenario encapsulated in Richard Wagner's classic opera, The Ring of the Nibelung, in which included Night Falls on the Gods and the entrance of the gods into Valhalla. These titles are suggestive of the possible changes in status of the Anunnaki. Finally, there is maybe some evidence to suggest that the state of affairs could be temporary and may have ended with the end of the Mayan calendar long count on or about 2012 AD. From mankind's point of view, the dysfunctional nature of the Anunnaki family and the continuing rivalry of Enki and Enlil may still be ongoing and having enormous effects on the quality of our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual lives. It's a very important question and one that needs to be answered by each of us.